today's CX Exchange Success Hour topic is systems to empower your pooled CS team. And I'm super excited about this. We could have gone on for days on this topic, and I'm sure we'll revisit it. Justin Chappell is the co-lead on today's topic. So let me just stop sharing for a second. And Justin, if you want to just say hello and introduce yourself for anybody who hasn't met you yet here in the community.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jan. And first off, yeah, Justin Chappell actually was former VP of Customer Experience over at Sixth Sense. I've just recently changed into a new role working with Growth Molecules, doing strategic advisory consulting. But I have 15 years of SaaS B2B leadership behind my belt. And it built out pooled or digital first scaled CS teams at 3 of my last organizations. So I thought it'd be a great way to share with this community some of those lessons learned and kind of where it all starts from, and kind of give you my perspective on, if you're going to be rolling out a pooled model, what are some of the things you need to be thinking about as you think about tools and technology? Because I do want to preface one thing real quick, and you'll probably hear me say this a few times throughout this. Tools do not fix broken process. So if you don't have a process in place, if you have not invested and got your leadership buy-in and have the right people and the staff to do so, it doesn't matter what tool you buy, what tools you already have within your tech stack, it's not going to fix those broken processes. So we're making some assumptions today that you have, invested in this. You've actually, planned, you have an approach, and you're really looking at how do I become more efficient to scale, right? And to add more customers into our pooled model. How do we become more efficient with our time? How do we create more human refined engagements for when customers do drop out of the pool and they have to interact with somebody? How do we make sure it's a really refined engagement and personalized? So that's just a little bit about myself, a little bit about the, that's my, what do they call it when you're doing your presentation?
Your elevator pitch?
Yeah, like of what the session's going to be. But I'm really excited to be part of this. The last one in July, and August looks like a jam-filled month of stuff with this community. So I'm super stoked for what's ahead of us as well. So
that's fantastic, Justin. So glad. All right. So let's go ahead and dig into it then. All right. So here we are. When we're looking at pooled CSM versus a named account CSM team, there's some unique challenges, right? First of all, there are so many accounts that you assign in a digital pooled team that you wouldn't even expect that you could assign, like you would, because it doesn't even make sense to assign when you have like over 1,000 accounts kind of thing, right? So, and you may only, okay. Justin, help me out here, because there's different examples. When you're thinking about digital CS, you might then only have one CSM who's handling, and it's almost basically just tech touch, right? But when it's pooled CSM, what you're intending is that there will be human intervention here, but there's also a lot of digital aspects to what you're doing with the customer. And when there is going to be a pooled CSM, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same CSM each time, right? And if it isn't the same CSM each time, then it's more important than ever that you have a way of assembling all of the information about that customer before they engage in that human contact, and to have other ways that are using the tools so that you're keeping the customer engaged and following that customer journey even when there isn't human contact.
Yeah, and I would even like, there's a question in the chat, and I think it's a great one too, because what is the true difference between a pooled CS model or teams versus named CS teams? And I think that, when you think about the different aspects or components of the difference between the two, think about the structure of a pool team is like a shared responsibility of a book of business. Whereas in a named CS team, you're really thinking about individual responsibilities associated with your book of business. So when you think about the next layer around that, you start to think about, well, what about the accountability factor? Well, in a pooled model, we're all sharing the success of that customer because we all own that book of business together. Where the accountability factor with a named CS organization or team is really more clearly defined at the individual IC or CSM level. And some people might get nervous about that because you're like, well, if nobody owns it and everybody owns it, then nobody owns it. Like kind of like when you do a bulk email. But what's really nice, and I think that second bullet calls it out, which is the change in point person that a customer will engage with can then move from being more generalists to becoming really more practitioners or specialists within your technology stack. So if you think about it in a pooled model, if I end up getting a request that came in from a customer and it's around the financials or the commercial aspect of maybe like the renewal, but I'm not really a good negotiator, but I know that Sally on my team is. Sally can work that negotiation portion, and I wouldn't need to do so because I'm more technical in nature. So you can really specialize and skill your CSM teams utilizing and leveraging a pooled model. I know that a lot of times when we think about how do you even communicate the change, because a lot of times a company will go, we're going to move now to this pooled model. We always have, in the companies I've worked at in the past, we've always looked at that as a positive to be able to say, we're going to be able to specialize the people that you're engaged with. So you're going to get a more highly skilled individual around a specific area of our technology. That's going to make it more efficient over time. And we're going to be able to drive better quality of engagements because we're going to have the right person with the right customer at the right time because it's in this pooled model, right? So there are varying differences between pooled and named. And we actually have a resource that we put together that we'll share at the end that kind of talks about the differences between a pooled and a named CSM team.
Yeah. And all of those things are actually in the resources if you download the slides. And so another thing I'll just mention too is I've actually set up, this was back in another consulting engagement where I set up a pooled CS team. And Pam, you mentioned what is the difference between customer education and digital CS and pooled CS. That's all of the different things. So with pooled CS, part of what we identified was that there were key moments in the journey for the customer journey that needed human, sort of like a human companion, right? And sometimes it's at the beginning of their journey when they're just starting to adopt. Sometimes it can be if they're off track, things like that, right? And so customer education is important and actually critical, whether you're in that human engaged moment or if the customer is in between, right? Because that's where you have all the various types of resources available to people. And so in that respect too, it can be very close to what you're doing with customer education, can also be very close to what you're doing with support, because that can also make it so, I always forget the word for that, when you're preventing more tickets. If people can help themselves and self-serve, then they're not going to go and create more tickets, right? Oh, Justin, what's the word?
Case deflection. Yep.
Deflection. It can deflect tickets, right? And so when you think about that, there's this whole relationship then between when you have, the onboarding teams, and then it gets handed over and you can do adoption, where you can use customer education to both help customers go through the journey as well as deflect tickets. There's a variety of different things the ways that all of these things work. Customer marketing then becomes also important as well, because that's how you're reaching out to the customer, whether they are getting things via email or getting messages while they're in app, right? And things are popping up, or they can go over and hit on a little question mark and things like that. Whether those things are put together by customer marketing or a customer education depends upon the type of content, right? But all of those things and working through what that whole system looks like is something then that you build out and in an intentional way when you're putting together, whether you're a digital CS program or a pooled CSM team, which is really, that the other reason why they're also in the same breath is because you cannot have a successful pooled CSM team without having the tools that help them understand what's happening with the customer base, right? And what's happening with each customer as it comes up, right? So that then they can also proactively have customer marketing messages so that people understand like, hey, I'm off track. Oh, really? I should reach out. Oh, this CSM is reaching out to me because I'm off track. Things like that, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, and I think that, it kind of gets into those critical problems that we're looking to solve. So again, the assumption is we have a model. We've agreed that the pooled model is the right approach. We have a process to engage with our customers. But when we think about these critical problems that we still need to solve for, this is where tooling can really kind of step in and kind of add value to the overall experience, both for our CSMs as well as for our customers. So I think we can all probably raise our hands if I could see everybody. We would probably say, how many times have you heard that, our data is dirty, or I don't have access to certain information about our customer because it lives somewhere else? Or worst case scenario, it lives in a spreadsheet on somebody's desktop, or it's in the AE's head, or the CSM never put it into the CRM or into the Salesforce account object. So what ends up happening is like we have this siloed data that's living across our organization. But if we could really tap into that and understand our customer, whether it's the behaviors or the outcomes they're trying to drive, and in a shared motion, be able to build and leverage that in a pooled model, will make for an overall better customer experience. So tooling will help solve some of these problems around siloed data, inconsistency in your customer lifecycle, your customer journey, and that experience, and then being able to give back to the rest of the organization. Is our customer successful? What's working? What's not? And giving us clearer visibility into reporting around what's really happening with that big group of customers, right? Because this is usually that long tail, or those, that 1 to 100 ratios. So we really want to be able to understand at any point in time what's happening. This will give us that reporting capabilities to do so from an ops perspective as well.
Yeah. And that also gets into some of the things that you need to focus on first, but I just want to stop for a second. Are there any thoughts or questions before we get into that? Yeah, Randy?
So I would assume, and maybe this is something you'll talk about, is it also based on the type of customer? So enterprise versus small. I mean, I know in a lot of organizations, the pool's very much a byproduct of the larger number of customers at maybe the smaller size levels versus your enterprise. You have more of a one-to-one, type of CSM that's assigned to that relationship. So I would assume that's another variable to consider in regards to how that's going to be within an organization from that standpoint.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, Randy, because generally speaking, people think of enterprise as only human to human and, and then benefiting from systems and things like that. And only the sort of larger long tail. But if you take a look at, say, over at Google, when they purchased Looker, right? They had a whole pooled CSM system set up for enterprise. And it was only if enterprise then purchased a sort of an extra package, right? A next level up, that then they would get a named CSM team member. So, it's a kind of thing, it really, though, does depend upon, do you have your systems set up in such a way that you understand if your customers are getting off track? Because telemetry or, your data, clean data, and those signals from that data is really critical.
Yeah. And Jen, I think, you raise a great point, right? And a lot of times that it also depends on what that customer prefers, right? I think that as I've started to continue to look at other companies and talk with some of my peers at different conferences and in communities like this, one of the thing around monetizing customer success, right? So when you start to think about monetizing, you still have to support your customers that are not part of that like paid for CS service. And a lot of times they can fall into this pooled approach as well. But that's because the customer prefers to interact and engage in that type of method, right? So it's really living up to what the customer wants and how they prefer to be interacted with. That really could also help change whether or not it's just your long tail, low ACV or low annual contract value customers, or is it a combination of strat, enterprise, and commercial customers, because that's how the customer prefers to engage with you in the organization.
Right, right. That's a great point. Okay, so then looking at, kind of some of these things, you need to have in place then clean data, customer journey, understanding of what the life cycle is. So it's not just, you're not just looking at the first year of the customer, but what's happening overall in multi-years, the visibility and reporting. So those are things you do need to solve for in order to have a successful pooled CS program. And then there's a number of other things you want to do to support it as well. Justin, do you want to?
Yeah. This is where I would start, right? So, there's a couple things I would, kind of keep in mind here, right? Is that, we've agreed that we're going to go through this process. We've defined our strategy. We're now looking at not just having conversations with the board or our leadership team around the budget to buy software. What we're trying to do is to build a use case on why the software is important. And I've always started with personalization, because I always take the lens of the customer in mind. And I think we could all probably, again, if we raised our hands or if we polled everybody, how many times have we called into like our cable company or our insurance company and feel like a number? Just because somebody's in this pooled model, we don't want them to feel as if we don't know who they are. We have a lot of information around our customers. So how do we take that information, use tooling to help us do so that we can start to basically personalize that communication with our customers so that they don't feel like they're just a number because they're in a certain, and I'm going to say support model, as in how we support them, not technical support. So when I think about personalization tools, right, like communication tools, like whether it be email or journey orchestration in Gainsight, or even like SalesLoft, if you don't have a CSP yet, your sales team may have SalesLoft. It's the use of tokens, right? That's what it's called, of how do you pull into your communication and your content that customer information. So think about like the emails you receive that say, dear customer name, which would insert Justin. It would go look at the CRM, pull that information in, put it into that email so that that customer knows, oh, you do know who I am, right? So you think about customer names, signatures for your CSMs, case numbers, renewal dates, all that information can get pulled into one centralized communication platform and then delivered to your customer so that they have that personal feeling, so they don't feel like they're just a number on the other end of an email. So I think that's what I've always started, is that personalization tool.
Yeah. And then Emily in the chat is also mentioning like the integration is key, right? And I think that gets to where you don't want to have different versions of data in different databases, right? You want to have one source of truth, but you also want to make it so that either someone is only entering in the data once, or that if maybe, with all the AI recorders and things like that, potentially you don't have to enter in as much data, right? So that if you have meetings that are taking place and you have the notes from it, then basically you can just have a CSM saying, yeah, I would just change some of these things. This wasn't correct, or, oh, it should have also included this other note, right? And so in that respect, then you can do that. And then, of course, once you have these systems set up, then the automation and understanding, kind of, and how you're going to have certain triggers, right, throughout the journey. And that was something that was a question, I think it was from Pam earlier. If it is sort of telemetry, if it's based upon if there's different moments, or, is it timing or telemetry? Like, are there triggers or timing? I think it can be either, but it's mostly based on the data. Justin, do you want to weigh in on any of that?
Yeah, I think I think Pam brings up a really good point. And that's why it's number 2 in my strategy of like why, or when I'm going out there and looking for software. The first is, how personalized can I have that experience be with my customer? But then, will it actually integrate with my tools and systems? So if Salesforce is my source of truth, right, that's where our contact data is, then I need to make sure whatever tool I'm using can integrate into Salesforce, because I want to be able to leverage 2 different things. I look at activity triggers and I look at time-bound triggers. So when I think about activity triggers, what I'm looking at is like, contact is removed. My main POC has now been deactivated as a contact. Oh, I better reach out. I need a multi-thread. Oh, the health score has moved from a yellow to a red. Kick off my, my at-risk play. So all of those things are basically activity triggers, but then you can also start to look at, can you get time-bound triggers in place to start to drive the communication? So think about like contract renewal. If you're on a 24-month contract, multi-year renewal, it might be at 180 days. You kick off your renewals process, where on a 12-month contract, it's 90 days. But you can start to leverage time-bound activities as well to help drive that personalization and that engagement with your customers, so that when they do have to reach out, it comes back to the right person at the right time within that customer life cycle.
Right. Yeah. And there is a real difference depending upon if your customer base is monthly auto renewal and you're working off of MRR, or if you are an annual contract, or if you have multi-year contracts, right? In terms of what sort of time triggers you might do. And also then how you think about your customer life cycle is different as well.
Yep. And then I would just finish up with the number 3 piece, which is automation.
This,
right?
Oh
yeah, go back one more. So like, to me, I'm going to go back to this. It's a real quick, and I'll wrap that one up, which is I live by this philosophy of like, I need to validate, automate, or eliminate tool or tasks and activities that my CSMs are doing. So if I can leverage a technology or a piece of technology, a tool, to eliminate tasks that my CSMs are doing, to make them more efficient, to have them focused on the right activities, to be strategic with their customers, that's a win-win. I need to make sure that my tools can automate processes as well. But I am a firm believer that you have to do your processes manually first, to assure that you're getting the outcomes that you're looking for. And then you go through that automation process, which is why I put that last on my list. So when I think about talking to like the board, or I'm talking to my senior leaders around a piece of technology, it's personalization, integration, and then we're going to be able to automate in the long term after we've matured our workflows.
Yeah. And just to Chandra's point in the chat, when we're talking about a pooled CSM, we are intentionally speaking differently about it than digital CS. While there's definitely going to be a lot more of just the tech touch involved, the intention is that you have humans that are engaging at certain key points, but they have such a large customer base, larger than you would, because basically you can have maybe up to 75 customers and actually handle your customers, but you get past 75 and your brain can't go beyond that. And that's only if it's not complex organizations.
Right.
If you're getting into enterprise, or, even some of the larger mid-markets, there's just too many touch points. You think about how many touch points there are within an organization. If you can basically handle, and this just gets down to neuroscience, and I'm going to mention Britt Andreatta again if I talk about neuroscience, but when you think about just how many relationships a single person can handle, you can handle about 75, right? And so if you get beyond that, it's just going to be, just too complex and too many balls getting dropped. And so even with 75, you want to have systems, to support that. And so anyway, that's why we're going through this. We have one slide to go to before the break, and we got to be quick about it.
Yep.
So
this is a build out slide. If you want to just build it out. So we actually have 5 of these that are actually available as the resources. We picked the upsell renewal one because we think it's a little bit more easier to follow, but it is a flywheel, right? So when we think about integrations and how different tools can talk to each other, and I'll quickly walk through, right? So CSP, customer success platform, we're leveraging Gainsight. At that point in time, we see that a customer's monthly average usage of their licenses may be higher or lower than needed. That'll kick off into Salesforce or our CRM to create an opportunity. That opportunity is assigned to the right pooled CSM at that point in time, which is then handed over to SalesLoft or an SAP system, a sales automation platform. If you use journey orchestration, you probably don't need that, so you can get away with the CSP. At that point in time, the personalized email goes out to that customer, giving them information around the upsell or the cross-sell associated with the license needed to get them up to speed. And then at that point in time, we have a conversation with our customer, leveraging Gong or Zoom. And then the most important piece is all of that information from that phone call then gets updated back into our CSP, into timeline, or into some type of notes field, so that everybody at the organization knows the exact status of that opportunity by leveraging the 4 different tools that we've outlined there. So I know I went by that pretty quickly, but we do have about 5 different examples of different workflows or tool use cases that leverage multiple tools within a CS tech stack to be able to accomplish that entire workflow. But I thought I saw a question, so I'll pause.
Yeah. So Fran, go ahead and come off mute and ask your question. I'm just going to show we even have a table of contents today for all the resources. So go ahead, Fran.
It wasn't actually a question. Having worked for 3.5 years at a company where we were actually building for about 20,000 customers.
Yeah, right.
We really discovered that tools like Pendo were much more effective, that a lot of emails weren't effective for those types of customers. Just something I wanted to throw out there. And those of you who have worked in Pooled understand it, but I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pendo has in-app messaging. Is that what you're referring to? Yep. And so there's things like, there's other tools that are in that category, not just Pendo, but certainly that is one where, if you're doing in-app messaging, you can either do messaging or you can have like little question, marks or things like that. So that when people roll over, so they can get the information as they need it. But keep in mind, when you're thinking about all your various types of stakeholders, right? For the people who are using your product, those are the folks you can get to with the in-app messaging. If they're not using your product, but they are a decision maker, you still have to find other ways of engaging with them. And that's where you might have a digital QBR type of messaging system, like there's Matic or Cast.app and all different kinds of tools out there that you can explore if you're doing something like that. But I've been sitting here on the breakout questions. There's a couple of questions. They're not succinct, but they are hopefully good for you to sort of dig into as you're thinking about either what it's like to be on the receiving end of a pooled CSM system, or even like support calls, those kinds of things when you get transferred around, or when you are trying to build out a pooled CS program. And I do know there's a lot of people here today who are either in the process of building them out or have built them out. So I'm looking forward to, as you go, did you get your breakout notes and the slides? Be sure to get that. I'm going to set up the breakout rooms, and then we'll hopefully get some really great notes from folks. I'm going to do kind of small rooms because we don't have a lot of time, and just come back and share whatever you come up with here. So, all right, opening the rooms now. So how did it go? What kinds of additional insights did we get? Because I'm sure there's a lot. Yeah, Randy. Ronald too. Sorry, I just saw Randy's first.
We were in the same.
Okay, good. Whoever wants to go first.
No, I think we were just kind of commenting, the 3 of us don't necessarily have a lot of experience with industries and use cases for pooled CSMs. And so we would like to hear maybe some examples of how it's worked, because we had just feelings on how maybe it couldn't work based on some of the experience we had. So it'd be interesting to kind of get that view to enlighten us on those type of experiences that have actually worked for others, or what are the industries.
And have you, because you've mostly had enterprise and
dedicated CSMs to a particular customer base.
Yeah. And I think too, you want to look at the economics on that, right? To see if that's something that makes sense. And, as long as it does, then you can still have, humans managing those accounts. But it just depends. I have seen it with enterprise. But any other thoughts on that people want to share their
Was there a particular question that may have been asked before I jumped in? I can give like insight from what we spoke on.
Yes, go ahead.
So one of the things, at least with our team, we have two digital CSMs that are working on a pulled model right now. We had CS leadership and I believe CS ops. So it was a really good point of view from all of them. I think collectively we talked on the importance of for a better customer experience, getting away from the siloed tools, meaning where our AEs and our SEs are using Salesforce more than our CSMs are using for game site. So having something where everything's talking correctly when the customer is brought on board from an AE, being able to still understand the customer's value when they come into the CSM's pool so that we can continuously understand, because one of the questions was, you call someone, you get moved over to somebody else, and you have to repeat yourself.
Mhm.
It is one of the most frustrating things, and I myself don't like that for my customers. So, as a CSM, I'll reach out and say, what are the needs for my customer? If I don't know it, please share it with me, because that just makes for a smoother relationship transition as well, instead of having to start all over, or hey, these were your values when you started. Are we still aligned with that? So
Right.
I think it's just a better, a relationship builder and the experience for a customer. And that was something that we were talking about.
Oh, that's great. Great insight. And when Shamara, were you talking specifically at first about in your own company, how you've been creating a pooled program?
Yeah, so we were talking about, we are this digital CSMs for our company, and we are creating this pool model, which is something I was really looking forward to hearing and just getting different point of views and insight that we can possibly bring back to maybe build it up. So that was what we started off talking about. We are the pooled model right now, and the processes are very important, but we're still building those out and getting the tools in place. So that's how it started.
Right, right. And definitely while you're sort of building out the tools and your processes, there will likely be some misses with the customers, right? And so that's great too, to take whatever information you do have and say, hey, and be proactive and say, hey, this is what I do know. What else can I help you with? Or it has something changed. And that happens with, even if you have a named account CSM, right? Where you can have, assumptions about what was important to them, and then things change in the company or, other situations, for them, so that then you need to kick the tires on those assumptions anyway, right? So it's great to, to do that also when you're setting up a pooled program. Do you feel like you've gotten some of the ideas around what key things you want to put into that pooled program?
I think we have a lot of ideas. Again, it's trying to get aligned with leadership and directors, because we definitely started the process without maybe having the correct tools in place. So now we're having to get the horse back in front of the cart, to say. So that's where we're at. So I'm really grateful, like the team that I'm a part of. We're very vocal. And I think I'm thinking it was Jay, he'd asked how important teamwork is very important. I think it was Justin. I'm sorry, I think that was his name. Having different keys, like having different sets of skills so that you all work together, and you don't have to be that main point that's me anymore, but everyone has a part to play. And I think it just helps with the lift as well. So you don't always feel on the spot to always have the right question or the right answer for a question.
Right. Great. Thank you so much for sharing. What other thoughts came up for folks as you were discussing this in your breakout groups?
I'll kind of give a quick, we talked about a lot of good stuff. And I think what we ended on it, and I thought it was an interesting, Sean brought up Ed Powers, a post that he's recently done, but we talked about the, what's old is new or what's old is back in style again. And remembering back in the day when we used to call them pods, like, oh, we're going to use this pod approach, which was like an AE, an account executive, a solutions architect, and then 3 or 4 CSMs all owning a group of customers together. But the technology wasn't up to par yet to allow for that like flow of information to move from the AE to the solutions architect to the CSM to very successfully support their pods. Now we call it pooled CSMs, which is a very similar model. But I think that technology and that tech stack is allowing us to now operationalize and execute some of the things that we may have failed at 5-10 years ago when we used to call them pods, if that makes sense. So we did a whole conversation around that.
That's interesting because I do think of pods very differently than pooled CSMs. I think of pods as being cross-functional, where you have maybe sales, account managers, CSMs, or just CSMs and sales, things like that. So, but that's an interesting perspective because certainly the same type of systems and communication is necessary regardless, especially whenever you're going across teams, right? Pam.
The trainer in me is going to say that you have to everboard, and that means that you need to go through the process on a regular basis. So, you need to go over and you say, this is how we're going to handle it. This is how we're, and you need to do it because you'll be amazed that people start doing their own thing and getting different ideas. So you need to have those meetings on a regular basis and say, what is our process?
Yeah, great point. Yeah, the process becomes really key. Process and data whenever you're working across people within a team or cross-functionally whenever you have introduced new teams into the process. So I know we've gone over, but Fran, do you want to maybe just, I know you've built out a lot of this from your previous role where you had 20,000 customers and there was only sort of digital and pooled CSMs as a model because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talked in our breakout session, and thank you, Jan, for calling me out. That makes me feel like I know a few things, which I need a reminder of these days, as you know. I had 2 real experiences with the pooled CS team where we were managing mid-market customers and doing it sort of on a round-robin basis, and really managing the incoming and kind of outgoing really on a pooled model. And then more recently, when we were doing with the thousands of customers and definitely managing incoming, but the difference was with the communications is that there really wasn't any one-on-one communication or very little one-on-one communication outgoing, and it was all needed to be digital. Whereas digital was less of an issue and less important when I was managing mid-market. So, and with digital, it really, because my customers were SMB, which is what happens with a lot of very large pooled customer situations, you need to reach the customers where they are. Like Pam was in my group, we were talking about if we'd had the ability to text them, we would have done that. We didn't start using Pendo until very late in my tenure there, and that was becoming more effective. So we learned lessons.
In-app,
we learned
messaging.
In-app messaging. We learned lessons more slowly at Talek than we needed to, unfortunately. But we learned, and so it really depends on the size, like how much, like is it SMB versus mid-market? Mid-market, I think, can always handle a pooled but there's still some one-on-one experience there. But, to that point, incoming issues can easily be managed on a pooled model.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. And thank you again, Justin, for so many resources and all that you put into that. Everyone be sure to download those slides. There's just loads and loads of information there. I know that we could do a few more sessions probably on this, so I'm sure we'll find some other angles. And looking forward to seeing you all next week. And in the community in between now and then, continue the conversation, please. All right. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.